Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Today we have Professor Joel Blecher. Joel Blecher is a professor of Islamic history at the George Washington University, and he is a well-known scholar in Hadith studies and Islamic history. And his book about Hadith commentary is one of the most known books on Hadith studies in last time. And it's our pleasure to have him today in our seminar on theological Hadith study, and he will present to us his ideas about Hadith commentary and modern discussion. And it's nice to have you, Professor Blecher, and now the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to start by thanking the organizers of this seminar for inviting me. It's an honor to be included in this group, and I'm going to give you a kind of bird's eye view of some of the work that I've done on Hadith commentary over the last decade, and I'm going to speak for about 35 or 40 minutes, and hopefully that will leave plenty of time for questions after. With that having been said, let me just share my screen. Is that okay? And we can get started. And
maybe I can make you as a co-host to share the screen.
Sure, I think this will work.
Okay.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Does that look good? Okay, and one other disclaimer is that I'm at my home, and my 2-year-old son, who is here with me, if he intrudes at any point, you will be well prepared for him, for his very welcome interruptions, or if you hear him in the background, he's offering his own explanations of Hadith. So, okay, with that having been said, I'll just go ahead and begin. And I'll just start by talking about I'll just start by talking a little bit about a manuscript that I found just before the pandemic struck a few years ago, tucked away at the Ambrosiana Library in Milan. And by the way, they have a remarkable manuscript collection there, particularly for Yemeni sources. But there's a lot of amazing, rich Hadith manuscripts there that will be interesting, I think, to many of you if you're doing research in this field. So tucked away in the Ambrosiana Library in Milan is, again, at first glance, to me, when I first came across it, a very unremarkable manuscript of Sahih al-Bukhari. It was originally copied in the year 827 after the Hijrah, or 1424 of the Common Era. And of course, this is a very interesting period of time. 1420s, this is when Zheng He is making his voyages from China to the Arabian Peninsula. It's the time when the Portuguese are first making their way down the western coast of Africa. It's a very exciting time, of course, in Egypt. There are these recurrent waves of the Black Death. So it's a very charged moment in world history. Of course, for our purposes, it's also the very heyday of Mamluk era commentaries on Hadith. This is the period where Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani is composing his very famous multi-volume commentary, the Fath al-Bari, this is on Sahih al-Bukhari. And so this is a copy of Sahih al-Bukhari that was copied in Egypt in this year 1424, and yet and again, so this at first it seems very unremarkable. We would expect to find a manuscript of this kind, and yet in the margins of this text we find notes from 4 separate hands that reflect the practices of scholarly communities from the 15th, 16th, 18th, and 19th centuries. And you can see that on the first annotation on the right of center, this is the pink, it records a series of hadith sessions or majalis that concluded on Thursday, the 12th of Dhul Qa'dah, 891, or the 9th of November, 1486. The second annotation left of center in the blue was concluded during Ramadan of 964 or 1556. And a third annotation, which is in the center, in the lower portion here in the green, occurred in Ramadan of 1192 or 1778. And these readers, though they were separated by long stretches of time, nevertheless returned to the margins of these delicate pages to this very same paper, ink, and glue to recite this text aloud, add their corrections, and offer novel comments on the sayings of Muhammad. In places throughout this manuscript, these various marginal comments from different eras and places intertwine with the notes of the 18th century reader decorating either side of his 16th century predecessors. The most modern hand to have read and annotated the text is the sparest, but also, I would argue, the most intriguing. This layer of commentary is attributed to a student who testified that, during Ramadan, he heard this text from the lips of the aging, iconoclastic hadith scholar from Yemen, Muhammad Ash-Shawkani, a year or so before Shawkani's death in 1833. Ash-Shawkani was best known for his barbed commentaries and his call to revive bold methods of interpretation that mandated a direct interface with the hadith, a view that challenged the entrenched orthodoxies undergirding Islamic legal institutions in the 19th century. And yet, the periodic annotations preserved in this volume and attributed to Ash-Shawkani, again, are somewhat mundane. For instance, Ash-Shawkani typically paused his student's recitation to ask that the student note that a variant of a hadith might be found in another section of Sahih al-Bukhari. In the following Ramadan of 1834, just months from Ash-Shawkani's impending death, the student returned to Ash-Shawkani to hear the second volume of this very same 15th century copy of Sahih al-Bukhari read aloud. Several times Ash-Shawkani struggled to sign his name at the end of the manuscript. The ink failed him not once, but twice. So you can see here, this is Shawkani's first attempt. And you can see he's trying to write Hadith Sahih, and he's trying to write Bismillah. A second time he tries the same text here, Hadith Sahih, and he's trying to write his name, Katabahu Muhammad ibn Ali. And then finally, on the third try, Ash-Shawkani succeeded in stating clearly, in the name of God, the most compassionate, most merciful. This is correct. Signed by Muhammad ibn Ali Ash-Shawkani, God grant us forgiveness. As the final Ramadan of Shawkani's life elapsed, this is the only comment he offered his student on this volume of the text. Examining this manuscript to this scale, that is, at the very instant in which Ash-Shawkani struggled to put ink to the manuscript's paper, and his growing reticence to comment as he approached the final months of his life, underscores an important point. The simple, embodied presence of the master and the physical labor he performed was susceptible to interruption, and that these changes, however minute, set the very conditions by which the practice of interpreting hadith was perpetuated. And yet, at the broadest scale of time, the 400 years of commentary this manuscript was subjected to, the list of political, social, and economic upheaval that transformed the world was likewise dramatic. Transoceanic mobility expanded. A global economic order dominated by Western European powers ascended. Print culture and literacy rose and spread, among many other phenomena. And yet readers of hadith who span these disparate temporal, cultural, political, and economic orders returned to this text, indeed, to this very same manuscript, to employ shared practices of reading and interpretation, even as they sought to highlight different facets of the text's meaning As a physical artifact, this manuscript offers us a profound lesson about the interplay of continuity and change that emerged in and across the periods of time spent continuously reading and interpreting this book in weekly sessions over months, years, century, even a millennium and longer. I first discovered my interest in Hadith commentary when I was invited to attend a live commentary session in Damascus, Syria, on a balmy evening in 2009. This photo is actually of one in Tunis in the 1950s. The commentator Sheikh Naim al-Irksusi had spent several years explaining Sahih Bukhari and was only a third of the way through explaining the entire text. So 7 years, and he's only a third of the way through. I think he was at Kitab al-Hajj. It was attended by hundreds of students from across the globe, and the commentator drew on a rich tradition of commentaries from classical Andalusia, medieval Egypt, and modern India to illuminate the meaning of the Hadith for his present audiences. Emulating the practices of his predecessors, he read each Hadith aloud and used each word or phrase to digress on almost every aspect of human experience: worship, love, war, business, governance, history, law, medicine, even brushing your teeth. But when I returned to Princeton later that year to begin my doctoral research, I found that virtually nothing had been published on this complex and multi-layered tradition. I could not even find an entry dedicated to the subject in the Encyclopedia of Islam. After a little digging into the sources, it became clear just how important and exciting this understudied field was. A quick search yielded 232 extant works of commentary just on collections that were first compiled in the classical period. 56 commentaries on Bukhari, 9 on its adaptations, 7 on its headings, and another 5 on collections that could combine Bukhari and Muslim. 31 for Shama'il at-Tirmidhi, 27 on Muslim, 12 for Abu Dawood, 12 for Tirmidhi, 8 for Ibn Majah, 4 on Nasa'i. Malik's Muwatta, of course, attracted 27, the Musnad of Shafi, at least 9, the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, at least 2. Concerning Imami Shi'i works, Al-Kafi attracted more than 16 commentaries, and Kitab Man La Yahduru Faqih, more than 7. The total number of Hadith commentarial works is exponentially higher, of course, when one takes into account commentaries on other key Shi'i Hadith collections, popular post-classical collections, collections of 40 Hadith, lost, uncatalogued, or otherwise inaccessible manuscripts that are referenced by the cumulative tradition. The number continues to sprawl when one takes into account modern Hadith commentaries recorded in print, audio, and video formats, and commentaries composed in languages other than Arabic, especially in Urdu, Persian, Indonesian, and English. This vast literature is a field unto itself, and yet Hadith commentary, as rich and important as it was, remained hidden in plain sight. How did Muslims interpret and reinterpret the meanings of Hadith and Hadith collections? And what were the complex social forces, technologies, times, spaces, and audiences that shaped and were shaped by the practice of commentary on Hadith? Said the Prophet of God, Hadith commentary across the millennium took up this set of questions by examining the periods and locales in which commentary on Hadith, and Sahih Bukhari in particular, flourished the most over the past millennium. Late Umayyad Andalusia, Mamluk Egypt, and early modern India. Throughout, I tracked continuities and changes that emerged as the commentary tradition moved from the era of manuscripts to the era of print and video, from eras in which commentators were connected to the ruling elite to eras in which they were distanced from political power, and from eras in which particular textual and institutional authorities were virtually unquestioned to ears in which those same authorities could be challenged. The book's method, which I'll be happy to elaborate upon in greater detail in the Q&A, framed Hadith commentary as a social practice and pays as much attention to the ways that the meanings of Hadith were shaped by commentators and their audience's political, cultural, and regional contexts and experiences, as to the fine-grained debates and standards of excellence internal to the interpretive tradition that developed over long periods of time. In other words, Hadith commentators were not only concerned with surreptitiously reading their own political interests into the text and the cumulative tradition. The power of an intellectual tradition that has endured over long periods of time is that it presses interpreters to open their present commitments and activities to the possibility of being formed by the texts and opinions they inherit. In this way, I found that the commentary may be better seen as the product of long negotiations and renegotiations of interpreters and their interpretive communities' reciprocal relationships with their past, presents, and futures. So the book was recently translated into Arabic. If that's useful for some of you, by Dr. Ahmed Ibrahim, who's a professor, a lecturer of Islamic history at the University of Cairo. And I was actually delighted to learn that a licensed translation of the book is now in preparation in Indonesian by Contradiksi Press. And there's quite a lot of interest in Hadith and Hadith commentary in Malaysia and Indonesia. And quite a lot of rich material there as well for historians and scholars of Hadith, which has really only begun to be written about and studied, which I'll talk a little bit about more later near the end of my talk. I kind of gave you the very brief overview of my book, but after it was published in 2018, even as I was finishing it really seemed to me that a single monograph can only map out the broad contours of the tradition and its key themes. Of course, inevitably, it left many problems, lacunae, and frankly, puzzles for a new generation of Hadith students and scholars to investigate. So to help stimulate this work further, I'd like to talk a little bit about more recent work in the field, which was collected in the just published Hadith commentary, Continuity and Change, which Edinburgh University Press released to the public just 2 weeks ago, which I co-edited with Dr. Stephanie Brinkmann who's based in Leipzig. And at the time she was at Hamburg, I guess the Center for Manuscript Studies. So I think this book is exciting because it's the first book to collect a range of scholarly essays on key texts and critical themes of Hadith commentary, and it really crosses a diversity of sects, periods, and regions in which Hadith commentary developed. It demonstrates, I think, that novel intellectual activity did not decline following the so-called golden age of Islam, and that in fact the medium of commentary thrived, that intellectual discovery thrived in this medium. This edited volume builds on Said the Prophet of God by pushing the field of Hadith studies to expand beyond analyses of Hadith transmission and into the vast and understudied world of the Hadith's normative significance to those communities that held them to be authentic. The volume takes readers on a whirlwind tour from the Caliph al-Ma'mun in the 9th century, Khorasan, to networks of Sunni and Shi'i scholars from Al-Andalus to Iraq in the 11th century, to the Mamluk and Timurid era thinkers of Egypt, Syria, and Iran, to the Shi'i scholars of Safavid Persia, to the modern Muslim scholars of 19th, 20th, and 21st century Turkey, Iran, and India. In many cases, these contributions represent the first sustained scholarly engagement with the culture and tradition of Hadith commentary in these places, times, disciplines, and texts. In part one, readers discover continuities and changes in several chapters that illuminate early Sunni and Shi'i attempts to comment on Hadith prior to the crystallization of the genre during the Middle periods. Stephanie Brinkmann examines the origin and development of the lexical commentary of Gharib al-Hadith. This genre is perhaps the earliest form of Hadith commentary, thus reconstructing its historical development and exemplifying basic structural patterns, which lay the groundwork for the subsequent chapters. Ali Aghai discusses Shi'i intellectual thought and the hermeneutical approach to isolated traditions, the Akhbar al-Ahad of the 5th or 11th century luminary Sharif al-Murtada. Aghai shows that al-Murtada developed a distinct methodology to interpret Hadith by applying a combination of both Mu'tazili and Shi'i principles. In the middle chapters of part one, the volume explores the texts, people, and practices that circulated in the context of the socially competitive post-classical Sunni and Shi'i scholarly milieu, and examines the critical themes in mysticism, theology, and law that are addressed across various regions in the Islamic world. Yusuf Patel surveys the interpretation of the Hadith of Al-Ghurabat, Blessed are the Strangers, in a range of texts from the 4th or 10th to 8th, 14th centuries to show that modern militant interpretations of the Hadith that stress its connection to jihad are actually a departure from the dominant ascetic virtues that Sufi interpreters associated with it in earlier times. This chapter is a case study of how Hadith commentary can be used to illuminate the contours of an important moral and religious concept in the evolving landscape of Islamic thought. Samar Dajani's chapter takes up the influence of Sufism on the Hadith commentary tradition more broadly and more explicitly. In it, he explores whether and to what extent we can speak of a Sufi Hadith commentary tradition. In doing so, this chapter also represents the first attempt to collect and introduce some of the most important works of Hadith commentary written by Sufis and focusing on Sufi themes. Part one concludes with Muhammad Gharibi's chapter, which discusses the form of Hadith commentary by examining Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali's extensive commentary on an-Nawawi's renowned 40 Hadith collection. Gharibi shows that Ibn Rajab played with the form of the commentary in novel ways in response to the intellectual and social context in which he was working. And I'll just say, of course, that Muhammad also recently published a very valuable edited volume that tries to think about where Hadith studies might go beyond the issues of authenticity, which have really dominated the field over the last, well, really since its inception, over the last 200 years. Lastly, in this part, Sajjad Rizvi's chapter offers readers the first comprehensive introduction in English to the flowering of Shi'i Hadith commentary in the Safavid period. Rizvi depicts a tradition of commentaries in conflict with each other over the very nature of Shi'i traditions. The Akhbari commentaries were a return to scripture as opposed to legal and theological reasoning, while philosophers and mystics deployed Hadith to confirm and corroborate their intellectual insights. This chapter concludes with a case study of how the notion of intellect or aql arising in Hadith was understood by various Shi'i interpreters in this period. And I can't tell you how important, again, I just want to highlight this chapter in particular, because for my own book, Said the Prophet of God, because the through line of that book was really anchored by commentaries on Sahih Bukhari, the Hadith commentary in the Shi'i tradition got a bit short shrift, as is, I think, an unfortunate pattern in Islamic studies more broadly, and in Islamic intellectual history. And I think I think the Safavid period is such I mean, it's such a rich moment for Hadith commentary, and to me it seems similar to the Mamluk period in the Sunni tradition, just in terms of its volume and the kind of the way in which it was both a center of intellectual life and also intersected with social and political life in interesting ways as well. So I think this is a really rich area for students to develop further. And again, I'll talk about that a bit more at the end of my talk. So we then move to part 2, which is the kind of modern recollections and reimaginings, which addresses Hadith commentaries in the context of colonialism and the birth of the nation state in Turkey, Iran, and India. Susan Gunasti's chapter examines an early 20th century effort approved by the Turkish parliament to complete a Turkish translation and commentary of Sahih al-Bukhari. In doing so, Gunasti illustrates how religious authority was articulated in the genre of Hadith commentary and in Islamic print culture, and how the legacy of Ottoman-era religious ideas and institutions endured in Turkish language Hadith commentaries after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Ali Altaf Mian's chapter then addresses modern South Asian debates on authority, authenticity, and the question of unity and diversity. He examines modern Deobandi Hanafi Hadith commentators and notes that they do not follow the lead of the 18th century reformer and Hadith scholar Shah Wali Allah of Delhi to reconcile legal differences in the service of a unified ecumenical approach to the normative order. Rather, Deobandi Hanafi scholars use both content-based or matan and transmission-based or snad forms of criticism to display their interpretive excellences and to defend the Hanafi tradition against criticism from Salafi detractors. Next, Shadi Nafisi brings to light the exegetical work of Muhammad Hussein Tabatabai, who died in 1981, who's a paragon of modern Shi'i thought in 20th century Iran. Nafisi examines how Tabatabai assesses the authority of a given hadith by paying particular attention to the matan of the hadith and its relationship to the Quran. This opens the possibility of intertextual and comparative work that crosses the boundaries between Sharh al-Hadith and Tafsir al-Quran. The last chapter, which is co-authored by Marusia Bednarkiewicz, Aslisho Bourboniev, and Guvard van den Bosch, breaks new ground by modeling the potential of large digital corpora for the analysis of Hadith commentary. These authors show that the tool of text reuse, particularly, that is, counting citations and excerpts of commentaries across generations of the textual tradition, can speak volumes about commentators' processes and their relationship to their predecessors. In this regard, the volume opens the known universe of Hadith commentary very wide indeed. While these case studies reveal many differences, they also help us begin to identify numerous patterns of continuity in interpretive techniques, scholarly practices, intellectual debates, religious aims, and adherence to certain discursive rules, and in the context of various social and political spaces. So this is everything that I hope we achieved in this volume. But now I'd like to talk a little bit about what we have left out, in the hope that members of this audience of Hadith scholars, young and old, may take up the charge. So this is what I will talk about in this final section of my talk before concluding. So first, I think we need more ethnographies that document and analyze contemporary practices and live sessions of Hadith commentaries, but particularly in contemporary Malaysia and Indonesia. This requires research into commentaries proper, as well as translation, as a form of commentary. Scholars may also be able to cull evidence of commentary on Hadith from the earliest surviving Islamic texts from the Indo-Malay world and from anthologies that contained Hadith translated into Javanese and Malay for local audiences who were encountering Islamic traditions for the first time in the 15th through 17th centuries. While Deobandi contributions to Hadith commentary are addressed in our volume and elsewhere in the South Asian context, we do not know enough of the commentarial literature circulating among Deobandi scholars of South Africa. Moreover, studies of Hadith commentaries in Nigeria and other parts of sub-Saharan Africa have yet to be undertaken. Scholars of Islam in America may also seek to collect and analyze modern American forms of Hadith commentary, such as those circulating online or those in CD or VHS DVD format in storefront mosques in Philadelphia, East Orange, Toronto, and other cities across North America. In these contexts, we might ask if the commentary tradition offers a forum for mediating questions of race, identity, and political agency. Practices of Hadith commentary, as you know, are likewise thriving in Muslim communities across the UK and in Europe. Of course, in Germany, you know this as well. And certainly recordings and live sessions of these meetings would also be ripe, I believe, for fresh analyses and ethnographic case studies. Our goal must not simply to be to analyze Hadith commentaries from disparate parts of the globe, but to examine in depth the way in which Hadith commentary relates to audiences entangled in their local and global social, political, and economic contexts. In understanding how power, tradition, and experience are woven together in the form of the commentary, future studies could offer readers a three-dimensional view of this practice that is too often flattened within the folios of a manuscript or constrained to the four corners of a printed page. Speaking of which, this volume, Hadith Commentary, Continuity and Change, draws on largely on print sources as evidence, although future researchers may seek to shed greater light on the intersection of Hadith commentary and the politics of print culture itself. Likewise, there is much more to be understood about the production, transmission, and reception of Hadith commentary in manuscript culture. Early analyses of manuscript revisions and drafts of works offer real insights into the craft of Hadith commentary, but many more sit on library shelves, waiting patiently for a curious researcher to examine them. So this is such as the case with Az-Zarkashi's autographed draft of his Tanqih, a very well-known, maybe the most popular commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari for a short period. And it's heavily marked with his edits and revisions. And this text is close by to some of you. It's in at the Stabi in Berlin. So there's, of course, you can see Zarkashi's cancellations. He's crossing out, certain ways of phrasing his commentary. So this really gives you a sense of how it was that commentators put these works together in the first place, and how they maybe shifted different kinds of strategies or shifted the way in which they tried to make sense of a text. And you can really see in a document like this the way in which a commentator is really grappling with the text and how best to expound it. Commentaries that are transmitted in the form of new media likewise offer or could offer novel archives for future research. These include bookstores and street vendors that sell Hadith commentary, as I said earlier, in cassette tapes, DVDs, CDs, or networks of websites that stream audio and video commentaries on Hadith. And of course, probably the most robust archive of Hadith commentary is already present on social media. It's even on TikTok, you'll find Hadith commentary there these days. As surprising as that is, I don't think it involves any dance, any special dances, but It's certainly there. So, the questions that you would ask if you were trying to make sense of this phenomenon might be, to what extent do these novel forms of media attract new audiences, and in doing so reshape the scope and effect of the commentary that they convey? How do these various new media, in comparison to manuscripts or printed books, how do these new media shape the form of commentaries? And what patterns of continuity and change can be found in these different forms? As I said earlier, the book contributes to the number of studies of Shi'i Hadith commentary. And as further elaboration of these particular intellectual traditions continue, I invite future researchers to undertake comparative studies that examine continuities and differences in the reception of Hadith literature as they are glossed and interpreted across sectarian lines. Likewise, this volume also examines Hadith commentary in multiple genres and disciplines of knowledge: philology, theology, law, Sufism, Isnad criticism, tafsir. Preliminary studies of Hadith commentary in the genre of prophetic medicine, which are published elsewhere, likewise pave the way for future researchers to build comparative studies of the practice of Hadith commentary across genres and disciplines of knowledge. To put it more generally, the field still needs studies comparing Hadith commentary with Quran commentary and with the genre of prophetic medicine. I mean, the genre of prophetic medicine is it's such an interesting field. In fact, my colleague at UC Davis, Miraj Syed, and I just recently translated this work by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani on the plague. And Ibn Hajar uses Hadith and this kind of medium of Hadith commentary to build a real argument about the origins of the plague and how best to respond to it. And you'll find, of course, I think it was Ibn al-Qayyim who has a work on prophetic medicine. And you'll just find you'll find Hadith explained in ways you won't find them explained in fiqh, works of, fiqh textbooks, or even your standard kind of line by line Hadith commentaries. You'll just find these really novel and insightful interpretations of these Hadith that I think really open the horizon of these works' meanings for the communities in which they were transmitted and read. So such comparative studies of Hadith commentary, I believe, would enable researchers to explore broader questions of hermeneutics across the Islamic sciences and in the humanities as well. This requires not only comparing the reception of Hadith across genres and disciplines of knowledge, but also comparing patterns of interpretation between Hadith commentary and other commentary traditions in which Hadith are not the central focus. How might studies of Hadith commentary, for instance, contribute to conversations across the humanities about the interpretation of scriptures, or canonical works, or foundational philosophical and political documents, like the state constitutions? What might studies of Hadith commentary teach scholars of hermeneutics working in other, more mature fields of Islamic studies, or those in the rapidly growing academic studies of usul al-fiqh or tafsir? Alternatively, what might students of Hadith commentary learn from the insights and methods used in these fields in Islamic studies? For example, as I mentioned earlier, in this volume, Samar Dajani uses existing debates in the category of Sufi tafsir to help us make sense of the category of Sufi Hadith commentary. Future collaborations across these subfields and disciplines, I think, are bound to yield further insights. The coming decade will also only increase the innovative forms of digital analyses that open researchers' eyes to distant reading and big data analytical approaches that complement the traditional close reading of the philologically inclined. This includes analyses of digital text reuse, highlighted in our volume's final chapter, but also leaves room for the kinds of methods from the digital humanities that are being practiced and developed elsewhere. This material is also ripe for social network analyses of Hadith commentators themselves. The very aspect of Hadith commentary that has proven to be the greatest barrier for so long, its voluminousness, may yet prove to be its greatest asset. There's just so much data to analyze. There is also the question of how non-Muslim cultures translated, recompiled, and interpreted Hadith. The recent study of a 16th century Arabic to Judeo-Arabic translation of a collection of maxims that includes prophetic Hadith suggests the strong attraction that this literature held for non-Muslim readers, in this case, Karaite Jews. The translation itself could be studied as a form of Hadith commentary. While rare, this discovery suggests that there may be more of this kind of literature and that scholars of Jewish studies may also contribute to this field. Future studies of Anglo-Mohammedan law and early Dutch attempts to translate the Islamic legal corpus may lead to further insights into the interpretation of Hadith literature outside the Islamic tradition. Moreover, placing early Orientalist and philological translations and interpretations of Hadith in the Western Academy, notably the works of Ignaz Goldziher, Gustav Feil, and more recently, G.H.A. Joinbal, in the comparative context of other non-Muslim audiences of Hadith, may likewise help us better understand the state of the field and question the assumptions that have shaped our own inquiries. Finally, I think it's paramount that we make progress on our understanding of women, gender, and sexuality in this tradition. In her ethnographic work, Saba Mahmood has briefly explored contemporary women's pedagogy concerning the interpretation of Hadith. It's a short passage in her book on politics of piety. We hope the field builds on these studies by offering a critical theoretical framework for analyzing the scholarly networks dominated by male commentators, even as women were important, critical transmitters of Hadith at certain historical moments, especially in the first Islamic century, in the Hanbali communities of Mamluk era Damascus, and once again in the contemporary era. So to conclude, in writing Said the Prophet of God in 2018, I had only intended to unlock the door to future studies of this tradition. And as my presentation has pointed out, even with the publication of Hadith commentary, Continuity and Change, our scholarly conversation has only just begun. Through the recent efforts of our 13 learned contributors from Gainesville to Exeter to Berlin to Tehran, our volume seeks not only to shed light on patterns of continuity and change in the Hadith commentary tradition, but also to lay the groundwork for future scholars with new voices and new concerns to step into the foyer and enter the garden beyond. Thank you very much. I will really look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Blecher, for this long journey in Hadith commentary through more than 1,000 years. And now we will come to the questions from the guests online. Or Ruggero, you have a question?
No, maybe we can start with questions from the audience.
Okay.
Otherwise, I can start.
Okay, you can start and then.
Yes, thank you so much. So actually, I do have a lot of questions, but I will try to focus on some. And the first one is very simple, actually, but I was asking this myself. So I would like to know your explanation why, I mean, they didn't develop an independent science of Hadith exegesis, such as tafsir for the Quran, for example. And why? So, I mean, you wrote something in your book why it developed more lately. I mean, the practice of Shah as well developed more lately. But why didn't? I mean, don't you have an independent science? You know, an independent ilm in the sense of hadith exegesis. And attached to this question, maybe also the question why it's Shah al-Hadith, you know, the expansion. I mean, why did this notion develop, and what does it say? What does it tell us about the Hadith? I mean, what the Hadith as a text is, and how the Hadith as a text is supposed to work and to create meaning, or to imply meaning. So this is one question. And the second one concerning modern Hadith commentary. I wonder if in your readings, I mean, did you see if there are certain characteristics of the modern commentaries, for example, concerning the significance of the reader? You know, the reader response series and things like this in modern hermeneutics, in the sense that the reader generates the meaning, etc. So is there something like this, or something also like you can find, for example, inside book, you know, this literary approach in trying, you know, to actualize the text, you know, through including contemporary political matters, or and also the literary style of language. So these two questions already, maybe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those questions. And I can hear my son in the background, and maybe you all too can. So forgive me if my mind is a little distracted. So this question of forming an independent, Hadith commentary as an independent science. It's, you know, early early terminology for Sharh al-Hadith actually uses the word tafsir to describe hadith. They call it tafsir al-Hadith, I think, to describe a majlis of a commentary on hadith in 11th century Andalusia. And it's one of the questions that we ask, especially in the introduction of the book, and in my book in 2018 as well, is what is a hadith commentary? Is it its own genre? Is it kind of an independent science? I mean, I think hadith commentary, you know, maybe this is why, you know, one of the reasons why, you know, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, is it? It's certainly, I mean, as you watch the commentary tradition develop, you start to see certain kinds of hard and fast rules developing, and certain kinds of rules of commentary, particularly, you know, even rules that are particular to the study of Sahih al-Bukhari. For instance, the analysis of Bukhari's tarajim, or his headings, have that there are specific ways in which commentators are supposed to treat and analyze the particularities of his headings. And in fact, Muhammad Fadl actually has a very nice article and translation of Hadi Asari, which is just the introduction to Fath al-Bari, Ibn Hajar's commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. And in that, Ibn Hajar lays out what he sees as every commentary, not just listing every commentary on Bukhari that preceded him, but in a certain sense, the rules of how it is that a scholar is supposed to interpret, and how are they supposed to practice this shutter. And so in that sense, it's not so, I mean, I think the comparison with tafsir is compelling, precisely because it allows us to see, to what extent was hadith commentary its own, to what extent can we say, it was its own, science to be studied, and I guess it's its own discipline, and it's in those, especially particularly those introductions to the hadith commentarial works, where you start to see, oh, there is there's actually quite a firm tradition here that's dictating the ways in which commentators are supposed to interpret these works. Even Ibn Khaldun, who's not a hadith commentator, he writes about his kind of brief moments attending these hadith commentaries, and he writes about it almost as if it were a science. I mean, alongside the kind of rules of tafsir al-Quran, he describes, what a hadith commentary is, how it's done, what works have been commented upon, which ones haven't, and the way in which a commentator, what a commentator is supposed to do. And you see, for instance, certain conventions forming, whether or not you even, the kind of, in Ibn Hajar's form, for instance, you'll see very detailed discussions of the isnads that precede the legal discussions, as well as certain kinds of issues of language or etymology or different kinds of lexical definitions. I think there's probably a lot of borrowing from tafsir al-Quran in terms of approaching the hadith. But then there are really important differences. Hadith works quite differently than Quran. So, and then of course, you see later in the modern period, I think Siddiq Hassan Khan has a book about hadith commentary and methods of hadith commentary. So it's certainly the case for certain hadith commentators. I think they did see it as a kind of professionalized practice with rules just as intense as you might see from a mufassir of the Quran, and the same kind of regularity and kind of the regularity of meetings once a week at certain times of the week. And of course, every Ramadan, it was common that you would recite Bukhari and then have at least some public recitation for it. So you'd also see within hadith commentary various subgenres. So commentators who did these really expansive works, 12-volume, 20-volume works, and others that were really aiming at more general audiences. And so they produced these concise commentaries. And of course, most commentators tried to claim they were doing the mutawassat, the kind of middle version of it. Nawawi's kind of middle version, I think, was still 12 volumes long. But yeah, so I think what we found, both in this recent edited volume and my first book, is that there are real patterns of continuity in this practice, conventions of the genre, things that would be out of bounds. I think, in answering your second question, we don't really hear about the student very much in the earlier traditions. We hear about the students in peripheral ways. If something's been dictated to a student, a marginal note, a description of a majlis of hadith in a historical chronicle that describes a student asking a question, but we don't see it in the commentary itself, the commentary genre itself. But in the modern period, the student, we do hear some questions being asked. Anwar Shah al-Kashmiri, for instance, produced a very famous commentary in India in the late 19th century, where a student comes to him and asks about the hadith in which, that Satan, I'm just paraphrasing, but that Satan can appear to you in many guises, but in a dream. but if you ever see Muhammad, it's absolutely him. And the student says he saw Muhammad, but he was wearing a British cap. So is it possible that he actually saw Muhammad? And of course, Anwar Shah al-Kashmiri describes this question in his Hadith commentary and has a very long response to it, at which the end he says, absolutely not. Muhammad did not wear a British cap, so you probably didn't see him. So, you know, it's you do see a kind of opening up of the commentary in the modern period, but you also see a perpetuation or emulation of these earlier, more constrained traditions as well. So I see there's another hand up, so I'll pause. I'll mute myself for now, and we can talk more if you have more questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Pisnik, you have a question? We can't hear you.
Yes, thank you, if I may. Thank you, Professor Blecher, for that presentation. You kind of hinted to what I was looking for in your previous answer, the question of the genre. As you were talking about, I believe, Samar Dejani's article on the Sufi commentary, it's so occurred to me that I'm preparing the lecture for tomorrow's course on Tasawwuf, and it's a collection of Rumi's poems. And a lot of those poems are actually commentaries on various hadiths of the Prophet. And so then the question, I think, kind of transcends the issue of the Sufi commentary as to where do we look as a matter of genre, where do we look for hadith commentaries? So is it like simply in a text that starts with a sharh of this or of that collection, or is there perhaps the need to spread the net a little bit more widely? And the second question, I think that you kind of pointed at this need for more ethnographic work in the study of hadith commentaries. But have you kind of come across questions of the ethics of? I mean, I was kind of intrigued by the very first picture in your presentation from the Zaytuna College, right? The reading of Sahih Bukhari. So the question is like over the ethics of a gathering or thinking of hadith commentary as a practice that has its own ethical considerations. It has its own aesthetics. So have you seen this kind of aspects addressed in the literature? Thank you.
Boy, those are two really great questions. Let me start with your first question. I'll take them in order. So the question of genre, and then the question of ethics of ethnography. I think the question of genre it's a really important one. It's one that we go into a bit more detail. I discuss it a bit in my first book, and we go into detail, Stephanie and I, in the introduction of this recently edited volume. And I think, part of what's hard when you're trying to cultivate a new field is you're trying to bring in as many scholars as you can. And when there have been so few articles published in the area, and so few scholars that are trained to work in this. And as you know, many students who study Hadith, for the most part, who do we read? We read Motzki and Yoimbal, and we look in these debates about authenticity, and we sometimes reference Hadith commentaries just to help us solve those debates. So we try to be very capacious and very wide as we could be in terms of our definition of commentary, because of course, once you say this is a commentary, this is not a commentary, you yourself as a scholar and as a researcher are making a normative statement, and saying this is what belongs in the tradition and this is what is excluded from it. And we wanted to be careful not to dictate to other scholars, what belonged. So we were, even if a scholar had come to us and said they found Hadith in architecture, a certain inscription, in a mosque somewhere, a hadith, and the way in which that hadith's placement interplayed with the larger structure somehow created some kind of explanation or meaning for the students or the audiences of it, I think we would be very open-minded and welcoming to that study in this field. But that having been said, not everything is a hadith commentary. You know, if you watch The Simpsons, Homer Simpson's dialogue is not a commentary on hadith. So, you know, you have to kind of think about what is the scope of the field and what would be useful for our field and rewarding. And I think sharh, these kind of the formation of these line-by-line commentaries on hadith, as particularly when commentators describe the work they're doing as a sharh al-hadith in their introductions or in the titles, or if later scholars, for instance, retrospectively describe their works as a hadith commentary or a valuable hadith commentary. I think those are also indications in which those works have been incorporated into the intellectual tradition. And of course, you know, calling something a hadith commentary or not, it's similar to, you know, for instance, you know, it has that normative dimension to it in the sense that scholars themselves, in citing previous commentaries, are in a sense doing the work of building that tradition. So Ibn Hajar doesn't just cite the commentaries he agrees with, he also cites the commentaries he disagrees with. But in doing that, he's including those commentaries that he disagrees with in this larger cumulative tradition and in this discursive debate, this shared discursive debate, even if he might disagree with them. So that's you know, one way of trying to you know, one way of approaching this is seeing the ways in which kind of commentators themselves recognize other works or other scholars as commentaries or as commentaries on hadith. I mean, we kind of go through a number of different ways in which you could try to define what belongs in the commentary tradition and what's not. But you know, it is. I think it has porous boundaries. I think this was something that that was brought up earlier in the first question, in the sense that you could read a work of fiqh, you know, a work of Shafi'i fiqh that comments on a hadith or explains a hadith in a certain way. So do we kind of have this kind of fragmented hadith commentary though, or kind of a fragmented sharh? So, you know, I think what I write about in my first book, I try to anchor it by looking at these long line by line, kind of these atomistic commentaries on Sahih Bukhari. So it's anchored on a particular hadith collection. And I think that's a really a valuable way of trying to attack this problem. But again, I think ultimately it's going to be hard to come up with a final definition of what a commentary is and what is not, particularly because of that normative dimension to it. But I think we can, I think as a field, we can have a healthy debate about what it means. The other question on the ethics, I think that's a really good one. I mean, this is a problem for ethnography in general, isn't it? I mean, this is the issue with ethnography, and I think you know, in my own work, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, this is, I guess, I mean, I think, I think it's absolutely, I mean, it's important to adhere to kind of the current ethical standards, and to look at kind of best practices of ethnography within both anthropology or historical anthropology as it's being practiced today. I think it's true, you absolutely have to be sensitive, and you know, I think looking at the kinds of recordings, literature that have been produced or streamed online, you know, these are materials that have been made for public consumption. But of course, you know, if you're doing the kind of participant observation, or you yourself are observing this, it absolutely raises important issues of research ethics, and again, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, this could also be a much larger discussion, but I myself, I don't have like a I wish I could point you to a resource or something like that that has been helpful for me, but I will maybe I will try to think about that and see if I can share one with you after our discussion. I mean, what kinds of concerns, I guess, were motivating the question, or are there concrete examples that you can think of?
Well, I was thinking in terms of before, I've done limited kind of research for my own work, and Tasawwuf in the Hijaz is very much grounded on Hadith study. But so my kind of question was more kind of centered around the question of the ethics surrounding a gathering where Hadith commentary is taking place. So to think of Hadith commentary not only as text from Ibn Hajar, but also as a praxis, as a religious practice taking place. So, but because I have not, and perhaps I have to do a little bit more work myself and kind of looking at what kind of literature is around, I haven't seen kind of the discussions that engage with the ethical. I mean. Professor Vimercati, he has one of his recent articles that I think is coming out. He speaks about this, that Malik ibn Anas speaks about this idea that the people sitting in the gatherings of Hadith readings, like there would be that even birds could sit on them, because this idea of being motionless, etc., and kind of what are the implications of so there is a certain way of sitting in a Hadith reading and in a reading of Hadith commentary. You mentioned the reading or Hadith commentaries during Ramadan, and I've been present in quite a few of them in the Mukhtasar of Sahih Bukhari, for example. And so the ethics around that practice of being present in a gathering where Hadith commentary is taking place, that's where I was curious to see if kind of scholars had engaged with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you look at that, the kind of the social practice of Hadith commentary, it's so rich. I mean, it's it is one of the things that you see immediately are competition, for instance, among students, especially those who are nearest to the sheikh, to who can be the first one to answer the sheikh's questions. You see older generations have a much different relationship with the practice. Sometimes, I mean, in Damascus, I saw, some, elderly gentlemen who just listened to the commentary. I mean, literally close their eyes, listen to the commentary, as if that just hearing the commentary was an act of devotion. And I think that's so fascinating. I mean, it really is an ethics of reading that's very difficult for us to access in texts. If we just read the text, when we see the practice, we see this much richer three-dimensional world in which there are many different generations. Of course, there's also a gendered element to it as well. The size of the audience is also interesting. In my own book, I also write about these commentaries in the presence of the Sultan, where you see the Shafi'i chief judge of the Mamluk court is explaining Sahih Bukhari for the Sultan, who himself may or may not understand Arabic all that well. And they're competing not just who knows the most and who has the best reputation. They're literally competing for their jobs. They're hoping to get a teaching appointment or a judgeship, or in some cases just tax breaks on their merchandise that they're selling. And we actually have historical chronicles that discuss the aftermath of a hadith commentary session in which a loser, one of the losing commentators, goes and seeks a consolation prize of some tax exemptions on the merchandise that he's shipping by sea. So you really see the way in which what's happening in the commentary session is then that the practice itself it's about this intellectual practice, but that there's also this kind of social and political competition at work for material goods and for political aims as well. And that's not something that's just unique to the Mamluk period, but it was said, for instance, at the mosque that I had gone to in Damascus, that the Mukhabarat were in the audience listening to the commentary. This is the Syrian secret police, so to speak, the plainclothes police. And of course, the mosque was, I think, just across the street from the Hizbatul Ba'ath, the kind of main office of the Ba'ath Party's office. So it was assumed, even if that's not true, like let's say that was a conspiracy theory, for instance, the fact that the audience was thinking it was true, what is that the commentary is operating on two different levels. It's operating on the level for people who, is the sheikh saying this, or is he actually meaning a political critique and he just can't speak freely? So again, those are really difficult for us to get from we just read manuscripts and printed works. And that's why I was really encouraging students to try to attend the sessions for themselves and to try to bring some of those questions into their work, that ethics of reading. So it's I have to put my son to his nap in 1 minute, but I see one more hand. Maybe we can take one last question. Would that be okay?
I just wanted to say one point to the question of ethics, because there is actually a lot in the literature about the adab of listening to the hadith. And I studied, for example, in the handbook of Hadith of Qadiyat Ilma, where this aspect is very important, and it's quite codified actually. So you make wudu, you say certain things, etc. It's a whole scenery, and I think that this doesn't have only a moral purpose, but also a technical one, because listening to the hadith is listening to the Prophet, and so there needs to be the conditions, must be fulfilled, so that this event of the Prophet speaking can actually take place, can happen, and can be experienced. So I think there's quite a lot to explore about this aspect.
That's right, and even there's a debate over the sawak. That's in a hadith itself, right? That a questioner comes to the Prophet and asks him, asks him a question, and the response is ra, because he has a sawak in his mouth. And the lesson, of course, is that it's not bad adab, it's not bad etiquette to be cleaning your teeth with a sawak in a public setting. It's not just something that you do in the bathroom. So I think that's a really good point.
If you need to leave now.
Yes.
I do. Yeah. Is there one? Was there that one last question?
Okay, I think Mahbouba, you
Yeah.
have a question.
And then
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really amazing for me. I have a question because something was ambiguous for me. Do you when you mentioned Hadith and Tafsir and Sharh in Hadith commentary, I didn't know that. Do you consider any difference between Sharh and Tafsir in Hadith? Because in Quranic studies, we can actually make create difference between Sharh and Hadith, but Sharh and Tafsir. But in Hadith studies, sometimes, for example, when I'm studying on Safavid period, some texts, I cannot make any difference. I cannot find any difference between these texts. Which one is something like Sharh or Tafsir? And I like to know what do you what is your suggestion?
Yes,
Yeah,
I understand your question. I understand your question. I've only seen it once, maybe, like I said, I only saw it once, and I think it's before this. Okay, I do have to go. I've only seen it once. I think it was synonymous with Sharh, so I don't think that there's a distinction. I think
Imam al-Khattabi mentioned both of them in his book Ma'alim al-Sunan at the beginning of his book.
right. Oh, that's very nice. Yeah.
In the same paragraph, he mentioned both of them.
Oh, very nice. Okay, so well, that's a great suggestion. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to rush now.
Thank you, and I
hope
see you, inshallah, when you to Berlin, when you come to Berlin next.
Very good.
Yes.
And please feel free to email, and thank you very much again for including me.
You're very much.
Take care.
Thank you very much, everyone. And then we will meet after next week, inshallah, with Professor Hossam Eidu, and he will speak about the asl, in Hadith criticism. And we hope to see you again, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.